On the border between Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, a mountain rises 9,000 feet above the ancient Near East. It is snow-capped year-round. It is visible from a vast distance in every direction. The ancient Hebrews named it Hermon, from the root word meaning the forbidden place, the set-apart place, the place that is not for ordinary people. Every culture that encountered it called it sacred. Every civilization that built temples in that region built at least one at its base. The Book of Enoch names it specifically, in chapter 6, verse 6, as the exact location where 200 beings descended from the heavens to the earth. For 17 centuries, that verse has been read as mythology. But the passage surrounding it, the passage that Western translations remove entirely, does not describe a descent from the sky. It describes a crossing, a passage through a specific point in the structure of creation where two earths meet, where the boundary between them is thin enough to step through. The second earth is not in another galaxy. It is not accessible through a black hole at the center of the Milky Way. According to the Enoch text, it is here, adjacent to this one, separated from ours not by distance, but by whatever separates two sides of the same surface. And the crossing point, the bridge between them, is a mountain that 3 countries currently dispute the ownership of, that has been a military zone since 1967, and that no civilian researcher has been permitted to fully examine. If suppressed biblical history is something you cannot stop thinking about once you find it, subscribe now. Every week we read what was removed. The passage we are working with today sits within the broader Book of the Watchers, Enoch chapters 1 through 36, which survives in Aramaic among the Dead Sea Scroll fragments designated 4Q201 and 4Q202 at the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, and in full in the Ethiopian Ge'ez manuscript tradition at Aksum. What is less known is that the Ethiopian version contains material preceding the standard chapter 6 descent narrative that the Aramaic fragments only partially preserve. This pre-narrative section, which Western translations treat as absent or irrelevant, carries the heading in the Ge'ez text of the words concerning the place of meeting and the cloth between the two orders. The cloth between the two orders, not a gate, not a door. A cloth, a thin surface, pressed against another surface, separating them in the way 2 pages of a book are separated, occupying the same physical space, distinct from each other, with the right pressure capable of passing from one to the other. Joseph Milik, the Polish scholar who cataloged the Qumran Enoch material for the École Biblique in Jerusalem across 2 decades, noted in correspondence from 1974 that the pre-chapter 6 material in the Ethiopian tradition described a cosmological structure that I cannot map onto any known Second Temple theological framework. He published no further comment on it. James Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame, co-author of the standard scholarly introduction to the Dead Sea Scrolls, has written that the Watcher descent narrative preserves memory of a specific event at a specific location with a degree of geographic precision that allegory does not typically require. Specific location. Geographic precision. Allegory does not require a named mountain at a named coordinate with named physical features. A record does. George Nicholsburg of the University of Iowa, whose 2-volume Enoch commentary is the most comprehensive scholarly treatment of the text, has written that the choice of Mount Hermon as the descent point in the Enoch tradition is not arbitrary, and that the mountain's significance in the broader ancient Near Eastern religious landscape suggests it was understood as a liminal location, a threshold, by every culture that knew it. Liminal, the academic word for a crossing point, a place between what is on one side and what is on the other. This is not science fiction. Science fiction parallel universes are separated by technology, by dimension jumping, by quantum mechanics rendered as plot device. What the Enoch text describes is a physical structure, a specific feature of the created order that has a location, physical markers, and a described mechanism. It reads the way a surveyor's report reads, not like vision, like documentation. The text begins with this. The pre-chapter 6 section of the Ethiopian manuscript describes the 2 orders, the 2 earths, as having existed simultaneously since the moment of creation, not one after the other, not one as a copy of the other, both at once, from the beginning, sharing the same underlying structure, the way two impressions share the same coin mold. The Ge'ez text uses a word for their relationship that translators have tentatively rendered as co-created, implying neither is primary and neither is secondary. They were made together. They have existed together, and in most places the distance between them is too great to cross. But at the fold, the place where the cloth between them is thinnest, the two orders touch. And at the touch point, passage is possible. But here's what makes this stranger. The passage names Mount Hermon as the fold, not symbolically. The Ge'ez text describes the location using geographic markers: the height, the direction of the prevailing winds, the presence of perpetual snow at the summit, the fact that water from this mountain feeds three distinct river systems. Mount Hermon feeds the Jordan River, the Litani River, and the Orontes River. 3 rivers, 3 directions. The text describes the fold as existing at the highest point of a mountain from which 3 waters descend. There is one mountain in the entire ancient Near East that matches that description. The Enoch text was not written by someone who had studied modern hydrology. The text was written by someone who either knew the mountain intimately or was preserving the record of someone who did. And this is where it gets disturbing. The Hebrew name Hermon carries the root herem, meaning set apart, forbidden, consecrated for a specific sacred purpose. The mountain was not named Hermon because it was beautiful. It was named Hermon because it was designated, set aside for a function, the way a room in a building is designated for a specific use, not by its appearance, but by its purpose. Every ancient culture in that region treated Mount Hermon as off-limits for ordinary access and reserved for specific ritual contact with divine realms. The Canaanites built a temple to Baal Hermon at its base, not a roadside shrine, but a substantial structure, deliberately constructed at the mountain's foot as a contact point with whatever was understood to be accessible there. The Israelites identified the surrounding region of Bashan, the land of Og, the last of the Rephaim giants, as the territory most associated with the dead, the divine, and the not quite human. Deuteronomy chapter 3 verse 13 calls Bashan the land of the giants. It does not call it the land where giants once lived, present tense, as if something was still there at the time of writing. The Enoch text says they were right about all of it. The mountain was set apart because the fold was there. The beings associated with Bashan were associated with it because they were the product of crossings, of beings from the second order who had come through the fold and settled in the territory closest to the entrance. The mountain earned its name. The territory earned its reputation. Now here's where it gets scary. The pre-chapter 6 section of the Ethiopian manuscript describes the fold as having 7 markers, 7 physical features at the mountain's location that indicate where the crossing point is and whether it is currently passable. The text does not enumerate all 7 explicitly in what the Ethiopian manuscript preserves. 3 are described in the surviving verses. The first marker is perpetual snow at the summit. The fold, the passage says, exists where the mountain is always cold, because the cold of the second order bleeds through the cloth into this one. Cold is the sign, not warmth, not light, cold. The absence of something that should be present. The second marker is the convergence of waters, where multiple river sources begin from one elevated point. The cloth is folded tightly enough that both orders contribute to the watershed. Water finds the fold the same way water finds a crack in stone, drawn to it, following it, running along its edge. The third marker is silence. The passage describes a specific zone near the summit where the text says the sounds of this order do not carry properly, where ambient noise behaves in a way that suggests proximity to a surface that does not reflect sound the way ordinary stone does. Not silence. A wrongness. The same wrongness you feel in a room where something has been removed and the space hasn't yet adjusted to the absence. The 4th through 7th markers are described in the verses of the Ethiopian text that R.H. Charles, in his 1906 translation, marked as a lacuna, a gap in the manuscript. Scholars who have compared his translation against the Ge'ez source text have confirmed the Ge'ez original does not have a gap at that location. Charles created the gap. The 4 remaining markers do not appear in any Western translation. We know there are 7, we have 3. The other 4 are in a restricted archive behind a door that has not been opened to outside examination in over 2 centuries. What the translators left out is this. The passage describes what happens when the fold is crossed, not what is on the other side. That is addressed in a separate section. What the crossing itself feels like. The Ge'ez text says the passage through the fold is experienced as a momentary failure of continuity, the way a film skips a frame, or the way a conversation drops a word in the middle of a sentence and the listener's brain fills it in without registering the gap. The crossing is not dramatic. It is a skip, a brief discontinuity. And on the other side, the second order appears identical to this one. Same mountain, same snow, same stone, except that the sounds carry differently. But here's what makes this stranger. The text says the first thing a person notices after crossing is that the world is quieter. Not silent, quieter. Because the second order has not accumulated the same density of what the passage calls the noise of iron against iron. The accumulated sound weight of a civilization built on Azazel's weapon knowledge. Azazel taught the working of metal for war. Every sword ever forged, every cannon ever fired, every engine ever run, all of it is downstream of that original teaching, and all of it generates a cumulative acoustic weight that the passage implies is physically real and physically perceptible. The second earth has no equivalent of that weight. No Azazel crossed to that side. The knowledge did not transfer. And the silence on the other side, the quieter air, the slower sound, is the absence of 4,000 years of iron civilization. The absence is immediately perceptible to anyone who has crossed from ours. The Enoch text says the Watchers, when they first crossed from the second order to ours, noticed this immediately too. But in reverse, they stepped into the louder world, and they recognized what the noise meant. In 2019, researchers at the University of Geneva published findings on what theoretical physicists call brane cosmology, the hypothesis, derived from string theory and M theory, that our universe exists on a membrane, a brane, and that other branes with their own physical laws may exist adjacent to ours, separated by extra dimensions too small to directly observe. The paper, led by physicist Ruth Durer, confirmed that brane cosmology is mathematically consistent with all currently observed physical phenomena, and that the existence of adjacent branes cannot be ruled out by any existing experimental data. At CERN's Large Hadron Collider, one of the active research programs involves detecting gravitons, particles that, unlike all other particles, theoretical physicists believe can escape our brain and travel through the extra dimensions between branes. Gravitons that escape our brain would appear in our instruments as missing energy, energy that should be there, present by all calculations, but undetectable because it has crossed into an adjacent structure. The Enoch text describes the fold as a place where energy from the second order bleeds into ours as cold, missing energy in our instruments, cold at the crossing point. The language is different. The phenomenon is the same. Max Tegmark of MIT, whose work on the mathematical multiverse is among the most cited in theoretical cosmology, has written that the existence of adjacent physical structures to our own is not merely possible, but mathematically likely given the current understanding of cosmic inflation, the rapid early expansion of the universe that most cosmologists now accept. Inflation does not stop cleanly, it produces structures. Those structures may be adjacent to ours in ways that conventional three-dimensional thinking cannot visualize, but that the mathematics describes clearly. The Enoch text describes a structure adjacent to ours in a way that conventional theology cannot accommodate. Both are describing something that existing frameworks cannot contain. The suppression of the bridge passage follows the same architecture as every suppressed Enoch section, with one specific addition. The Council of Laodicea in 364 CE removed the Book of Enoch from accepted scripture. Jerome produced the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE and dismissed Enoch's cosmological claims. Augustine argued against multiple created orders in City of God. These are the standard suppression layers, but the bridge passage has an additional suppression layer that the other sections do not. If the crossing point between two Earths is located at Mount Hermon, then the Watchers did not descend from a theological heaven. They crossed from an adjacent earth. They were not fallen angels in the theological sense. They were beings from the second order who used the fold to enter our order. That reframing removes the entire angelic hierarchy from its foundation. If the Watchers came from an adjacent earth rather than from the divine realm, then the theological structure that organizes all of Christian and Jewish cosmology, the hierarchy of divine beings descending from God's throne to the earth, collapses entirely. Augustine understood this. The bridge passage was not suppressed because it described a second earth. It was suppressed because it described where the beings came from. And that location was not where the theology needed them to have been. James Bruce, who carried handwritten copies of the Ethiopian Enoch back to Europe in 1773, described the pre-chapter 6 material as a passage I found I could not account for within any religious framework known to me. He published nothing further on it. He moved on. What modern readers don't realize is this. R.H. Charles, in his 1906 translation, created the artificial lacuna in exactly the section describing the 7 markers and the crossing mechanism. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has preserved the full text since the 4th century. Their manuscript has no gap. The gap exists only in the version that reached the Western world. Mount Hermon has been a military zone since 1967. The Israeli-Syrian ceasefire line runs directly across its slopes. There is a United Nations buffer zone on the mountain. Portions of the summit are occupied by Israeli military installations. No civilian researcher has been permitted unrestricted access to the upper mountain since the Six-Day War. In 2016, a researcher at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem applied for access to conduct geological survey work in the Upper Hermon region. The application was declined by military authorities without explanation. A second application in 2018 was declined. A third application in 2020, requesting only access to archived survey data from previous geological studies of the region, received no response. The mountain is not accessible. It has not been accessible for over 50 years. The fold, if the Enoch text is accurate, sits inside a military exclusion zone on the most contested border in the Middle East. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying that a physical surface connecting two Earths sits inside a military installation on Mount Hermon, passable under the right conditions. I am not saying that CERN's missing energy measurements are detecting the fold. Ancient documents carry centuries of copying and interpretation. The Ge'ez text has passed through many hands. But what we have to confront is this. The Enoch text names a specific mountain. That mountain is called the Forbidden Place in its own language. It sits at a hydrological convergence point, the only such point in the ancient Near East that the text also specifies. Every ancient culture that knew it called it a threshold. The brane cosmology of current theoretical physics describes adjacent structures to our universe that are mathematically necessary and physically undetectable except at fold points where their energy bleeds through. And the mountain the Enoch text names as the crossing point has been inside a military exclusion zone for the entire period during which modern science developed the tools to investigate it. Mount Hermon is still there. The snow is still on the summit. The 3 rivers still descend from it in 3 directions. The fold, if the text is right, is still there, at the highest point, where the cold bleeds through, where sounds do not carry the way they should. The Ethiopian manuscript is still in Aksum, the bridge passage still inside it, still describing the cloth between the 2 orders and the mountain where it is thin enough to cross. The second Earth is adjacent. The bridge has a location, and the location has been closed for 50 years.